There is probably nothing more gruesome in all of mankind's history than old school torture and execution. It was a pretty horrible way to go. But can you imagine the type of individual that would have it in themselves to actually do this to another human being? What if I told you we don't have to imagine? What if I told you we actually have the diary of a man like this? Franz Schmidt. Franz Schmidt was born in 1555 in the Bavarian village of Hof, and he and his father worked as woodsmen. There aren't any records of his life before his career, but there is a record of how his career started. The local Margrave, Albrecht II, wanted 3 men hanged, and no one was willing to do it due to the negative connotations that came with being an executioner. So the Margrave picked a young man at random from the crowd, and that young man was Franz Schmidt. He performed the executions, but he was completely socially stained by this because being an executioner, although the townsfolk knew it was a necessary job, it was considered one of the dishonourable trades, and the townsfolk wouldn't interact or socialise with anyone from the dishonourable trades. Since Franz had now been placed into this category by this event, he had no choice but to continue down this career path, so in 1573 he moved to Bamberg to become an executioner's apprentice. After 5 years of being an apprentice in Bamberg, he managed to become an executioner at the Nuremberg Rat house in 1578. While he was there, he married the chief executioner's daughter and they had 7 children. After the chief executioner retired, Franz himself got the job. He was now completely in charge of the Nuremberg Rat house, and being chief executioner paid very well. He was even given free housing, which he made even larger through all of his wealth. I'm going to give a little bit of a description of the Nuremberg Rat house just because I think it's very important that you know what it was like. The cells were small and cramped, usually with only a straw mat for a bed, if you were lucky, and the only other thing in the cell would be a chamber pot with a lid that would double as your table, so you could literally eat where you shit. Prisoners also always had their arms, legs and waists shackled, even the children. But if you were wealthy or had a wealthy family, they could sometimes pay tribute to the chief executioner to make you kind of exempt from certain forms of punishment, like, for example, the shackles, or get some extra comforts added to your cell. Also, if you were imprisoned here, you were expected to cover the costs of your imprisonment. So if anyone did get released from the rat house, they got released with debt, and then when they couldn't pay the debt, they would then get rearrested and brought back to the rat house for not paying the debt, where they would just gather more debt. The prison was only cleaned twice a month, and in the winter it would get freezing, so what they used to do to try and keep the prison warm was burn coal fires, but all that did was cause coal smoke to spread through all of the wings and all of the cells, so everyone was constantly choking, coughing and spluttering, as well as having their eyes burning from the coal smoke all the way through winter. As for medical and religious help, it was available. It just almost never got granted. The conditions were so horrible that people who had spent a long time in the prison, when they were released, they showed signs of brain damage. Some of the cells were also marked with symbols. For example, a cell with a black cat on the door is where they would keep witches, and a cell with a cock on the door is where they would keep arsonists. That kind of cock. Not the other one. There were 3 larger cells that had a table and chairs in them. This is where the condemned would be given their last meal, and then when they were getting removed from these cells to be taken to the gallows, the executioner would give them the strengthening draught, which was a very, very strong alcoholic beverage, you know, just to settle the nerves a little bit. At the end of the hall was the torture chamber, which contained all of the executioner's tools, and it also had a sign on the wall that said, Male patratis sunt atra theatra parata, which, translated from Latin, means dark theatres are best for dark deeds. When it came to the rules about what Franz was allowed to do to the prisoners, there were none. Franz was allowed to be as cruel and as imaginative as he wanted to be. If it meant extracting a confession, he was allowed to do it. Pregnant women, however, were released unless the crime was very serious. This was during a time when everyone was extremely religious, and so the jailers, executioners and torturers would refuse to do anything to a pregnant woman because it placed the innocent unborn child at risk. Some women charged with serious crimes would say that they were pregnant, at which point they would still get kept in the prison, but they would be put into a nice, comfortable cell with a lot of comforts. They would be given proper, real food. They would be given medical visits and religious visits and all of these other things to make sure that the child was okay. However, if after a certain period of time you weren't showing signs of pregnancy, and it turned out that you were lying to try and avoid your sentence, oh Lord, did Franz make you suffer? Torture itself was mostly done to extract a confession, or as punishment for some minor offences. But most of the time, whenever the condemned got brought into the room and seen the torture tools, that was all it really took to make them start singing like a canary. The main methods that Franz would use would be the thumb screws, the stretching ladder, the breaking wheel, which was a more extreme version of the stretching ladder. He would also clamp red-hot tongs down on the accused's body. He would also set fire to their armpits, and he would also hang them from the ceiling by their wrists and then start attaching heavier and heavier weights to their ankles. However, some people who had not committed a crime would refuse to confess because they had done nothing wrong. So the torture would just keep going and going and going, which means that most of the time these people would confess to anything the executioner accused them of, simply because they just wanted the suffering to end. Also, wealthy and influential people could just bribe their way out of the prison. As well as, see, to actually be taken to the jail and tortured, all it would take is a single accusation from a rich and influential person, or for enough people who hate you to all make some stuff up and submit the same accusation. That was all it took. No evidence whatsoever. Just on the say-so of either an important person or a lot of people who probably hate you. Which means that if you were just a little bit of a dick, if you'd pissed off enough people, they just all need to say the same accusation, and that's enough for you to get wrapped around the breaking wheel. It wasn't a great system. In regards to the actual crimes themselves, you got 3 categories. You got light offences, serious offences, and very serious offences. Very serious and serious offences were things like treason, murder, rape, highway robbery, arson, things like that. Whether they were defined as serious or very serious depended on the extent of the crime. Both of these classifications always resulted in execution, but there was a difference. Serious, you get executed. Very serious, you go through unimaginable suffering, and then you're executed. Light offences included things like thievery, if it was your first offence and it was under 1 florin in value, roistering, which is an old school word for drunk and disorderly, being homeless, and also being an unruly apprentice. Yep, apparently talking back to your boss was considered a crime. Light offences were usually punished by whipping, maiming, branding, fines, or banishment for a set or indefinite period. As for the executions, they would be performed in public at the gallows, where all of the families and townsfolk would all gather around for a nice day out to watch people die. The most common methods were hanging and beheading, but people would only be beheaded if they met some special requirements. Beheading is obviously a lot quicker and a lot less painful than hanging, and it was also viewed as the more honourable and dignified way to go, so people would always ask for it instead. But the only way you would get a beheading instead of a hanging is if you had past military service or if you were of good, reputable standing. And whenever the executioner granted a beheading instead, it was recorded as the executioner granting the condemned a favour. Drowning was another method, but it was very rarely used, and the most extreme method was the breaking wheel. And Franz actually had a portable version that he would bring around with him to the gallows, and that was only reserved for the most serious criminals. I could go on and on for ages about the prison and the criminal process. I have left a lot of stuff out, but it is all in the book. But let's get down to the real meat. the executions. Let's see the names, crimes, and sentences of the people that Franz dealt with in his own words. Some of the crimes are actually pretty cruel. For example, Klaus Renkart of Felsdorf, a murderer who committed 3 murders with an associate. First, he shot dead his companion. Secondly, a miller's man who helped him to attack and plunder a mill by night. The third case was again at a mill called the Fox Mill, on the mountains, which he attacked at night with a companion. They shot the miller dead, did violence to the miller's wife and the maid, obliged them to fry some eggs in fat and laid these on the dead miller's body, then forced the miller's wife to join in eating them. He kicked the miller's body and said, "Miller, how do you like this morsel?" He also plundered the mill. For these things he was executed on the wheel at Grates. That's very Tarantino. Some of them are also a little bit weird. Wastel Pennis of Lichtenberg, a butcher and thief, who sold dog's flesh as mutton, hanged at Rotkirch. That seems a little bit extreme. July 21st, Heinz Grossen, alias Lazy Heinz, a robber beheaded with the sword at Nuremberg. I dissected and cut up his body. That's where the entry ends. He doesn't give any reason or anything as to why he did that. He just says he cut up the guy's body. August 10th, George Schopf of Ern, near Hohenstein. A lecher guilty of beastliness with 4 cows, 2 calves, and a sheep. Beheaded for unnatural vice at Velm, and afterwards burnt together with the cow. Why? November 6th, Hans Segert of Pollingen, near Neumark, a farmhand who murdered a tailor named Summerlane at Sundersville, with a triangular fence post. Beheaded here. Wept all the way to the gallows. September 2nd, Anna Rebelin of Pegnitz, who had a house at Urbach, a thief who entered houses here more than 40 times. She went up 2 or 3 flights of stairs into the rooms and stole a great quantity of goods. Beheaded with the sword. According to records, Franz actually balls this one up. Instead of getting her in the neck, he missed and actually cut off a perfect circle of skin at the top of her head. Anna apparently started jumping up and down saying, "God has spared me, I have been spared by God, you must now let me go." Franz just sort of winked at her and said, "I'm afraid that's not how this works, sweetheart." And he got his apprentices to put her back into position. The second swing was successful. Year 1586 of our Lord. November 26th. The Shepherd of Ware, because for the last 2 years he had played the ghost in the house and tugged at people's feet or heads in their sleep. Flogged out of the place. Did someone really get exiled for giving people frights? Franz finally retired in 1617 after being chief executioner of the Nuremberg Rat House for 39 years, and during his career he carried out a total of 361 executions, and all of them are detailed here in his book. During his retirement he became a medical consultant. Alright then. And he passed away in 1634 at the age of 79 years old, and he was buried in Nuremberg. I think what surprises most people about the book is when Franz is discussing himself executing these people and discussing their crimes, he does it so nonchalantly, just so emotionlessly, that you can't help but feel that maybe he was born for this job. I mean, the vast majority of entries literally just say, just a single sentence, "A thief hanged." Just a single sentence, and there's so many like that. But there was days where he just couldn't be bothered talking about the man he just killed. I definitely would recommend the book, because it is a very good read. It's not a very pleasant read, but it's a good read.
It's Count Dankula on YouTube. Everybody should subscribe.